Carre Otis, welcome to the Thought Room.
Thank you for having me. I'm so happy to be here.
It's such a pleasure to be in your home here. And I love to give a little context for how on earth we're sitting at this table together.
Totally.
So I can't remember exactly when it was, but I got a message from you on Instagram. It was very simple, very sweet. And it was just like, I love your podcast. And I was like, awesome. Who is this person? I love that. And I love, to take time to respond back to everybody who gets excited about the show. And you ended up sharing with me that you listened to an interview that I did with my friend Jenica. I think that episode was called A Resilient Heart. And she just told a harrowing and brave story about her sexual assault and her healing journey and her plant medicine journey with Iboga. And so that initially, I think, was maybe how we connected. Is that right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so on that note, something came alive in you when you heard that, or there were some concentric circles with your own story, I think, that hit home. Would you be willing to open us up with why you felt called to connect?
Yeah. I think for me, it starts in 2011, and I was already a mother, and I realized that things that I had overlooked and put to the side in my life experience, I didn't want my daughters to do that and to follow in my footsteps and to normalize sexual assault, sexual abuse, sexual harassment that so many women endure on a daily basis. And so it inspired me to write my memoir, Beauty Disrupted, that was published in 2011 by HarperCollins. And in it, I speak about an experience in Paris, France, when I was a minor. I was trafficked when I was a minor from San Francisco to New York, and then from New York to Paris, to an agent, an individual that was a known predator within the industry. And I was raped by him repeatedly. And, really buried that for a long time. And it was becoming a mother that inspired me to share about this. And this was pre the Me Too movement. This was when, these are really hard subjects to discuss. Certainly at that point in the world, nobody wanted to touch that information. And I was blown away when I went out on my book tour. Nobody asked me any questions about some of the hardest pieces that I had divulged in this book. And it was the strangest thing to me. It was like, being in another world. So fast forward, we are now there is a criminal investigation underway against this individual. There are 14 women who've given their testimonies to the police. There's actually 24 of us in total. We see that there is this systemic abuse within this industry, but within so many different of our communities. And so when I heard Jenica's story, I've been working in the Tibetan Buddhist community for over 30 years. I've been working within the plant medicine community for 12 years and have my own stories where I've also seen this dynamic normalized, and women and men, sexually abused, assaulted in the most vulnerable states. And it's one thing, in politics, in the fashion industry, like that's all horrible. But when you move into these subtler areas where we have to be vulnerable to do this healing work, it is so unacceptable. And people are late to the table about talking about this and addressing this. So your interview specifically with Jenica, it resonated with me so much. I actually have my own stories about that person, not exactly the same, but they're not exactly the same because I've been down this path for many, many years now talking about this. So that's how I think that interview, I was just like, oh, you and I need to talk. Yeah.
Wow. So you have your own experiences with that same specific person that Jenica was speaking about.
Yeah.
That's incredible and painful to hear. And I really appreciate you coming forward with this, because on this show, we really like to talk about both sides of issues, and a great deal of the first, dozen or so episodes were just glowing reviews of the plant medicine world. But I think it's so healthy and so important to bring this discernment in and to talk about these very real issues, because like you said, this is another psychedelic renaissance. Like we're on the come up of something, and we need to be very thoughtful and careful and procedural about how we're doing these things.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are amidst this renaissance, and I have a lot of concern for the impact that we have on our indigenous communities, and the impact, that the plant medicine also has on humanity. It can go many different ways. It can be an incredible rocket fuel for healing. And in my belief, having had a spiritual practice and a very disciplined practice before I came into the world of plant medicine, for me, it's been incredible and a huge part of my own healing journey, truly. I've also seen it go haywire and sideways. People that aren't vetted and really, truly, this might not be the best path for them. And a lack of discernment when it comes to this might not be, the best step, because it can be incredibly destabilizing. And if there's not integration, integration support, which I think is also a new in the West concept. But if you go to Gabon to be initiated, there's zero integration.
Right.
If you're going to, unless you're with a Western center that's come out in Peru or in Costa Rica, you might have those integration calls, but with most of our indigenous communities, that's not how it goes. And so that can be really hard for the Westerners specifically.
Right, because, we're also coming back to our Western world, where if we were raised indigenous, we grew up indigenous, we were in that culture, and then we had a different understanding contextually and relationship with these medicines, then afterward, you're there, you're in your community, you stay, you're used to the way that things are. But so we're opening up these Pandora's boxes of things that seem really exciting and juicy and healing, and they are, and they can be. But, this element of then to take yourself and go plop yourself back in the Western world, where sometimes it can feel like your brain's been a little bit of scrambled eggs. Things are rewiring. You're trying to make sense of a new paradigm. So it's really important what you're saying. I really like to emphasize this. What do you think?
There's one other piece to this too, that I see Westerners really glamorize things. And in that glamorization process, they also hand over their power and their ability to use critical thinking. Like, is this a good situation? Is this a safe situation? What's the reputation of the person I'm literally going to be laying down in front of for 24 hours? And so in this want to make it, and also that Westerners love, the fast track, easy solution, like something that's convenient. Right. And so the want to get onto something that might make it better, whatever the better is, as soon as possible. I think there's a dropping away of that critical thinking, of really checking out where it is that I'm going and going to journey, and who is it with, and looking at the integrity.
Totally. That glamorization being, quite often we see Westerners putting the shaman on the pedestal.
Totally.
Like, this is a super being.
Totally.
And it's really not true. They're just as human as us, and they have their own shadow. It just maybe comes out differently. It could be around money. It could be around sexuality. It could be around family stuff. But everybody, I don't care who you are, I don't care if you work with medicine regularly or not, everybody has shadow. And that's important to be aware of.
It's so interesting. I started to really notice this when I was living in Malibu, and I was hosting monks from a Tibetan monastery. And without fail, all of the Westerners that would have them come do these healing ceremonies in their homes, it was like clockwork. They just they were completely like mesmerized and in awe and assuming that these individuals had their shit together.
Right.
And I happen to know a couple of them and they really didn't.
Right.
And so it's been really eye-opening for me for decades now. So it's interesting moving into the plant medicine community, and it's no different. It's no different. We have to look at it with that discriminating wisdom and awareness that we would any other situation we're in.
Will you talk about your initiation into Iboga and kind of what spurned that decision initially to go do that and partake in that? I'm sure it was very intense.
The story is actually quite outrageous. So when I was in my early 20s and I was involved in a very dark marriage and I was working out all sorts of shadow stuff, I became a heroin addict. And at that time, no internet, like there weren't these things. But there was somebody somehow knew that I was suffering and handed anonymously my agent a piece of paper, and on it it said Iboga.
Wow.
Yeah. And it stuck with me. It was like, whoa, like, what is this? And I'm not like totally not ready for that right now.
Were you like a little mad? Were you like, who is this from?
It was more of the mystical.
Yeah.
Because my life, I came in and I have anchored myself to spiritual teachings and Tibetan Buddhism and all of this, that even though I've like gone down into the depths of hell, I've always carried with me this anchor to my spiritual life and to the mystical and the magical. So in that moment, that piece of paper was more like somebody from another dimension just came in to be like, hi, we've got our eyes on you.
Yeah.
Here you go.
Wow.
So fast forward, I ended up getting off of heroin and being one of the first to go through rapid withdrawal with this amazing doctor in Southern California. Long another story. And that was it for that dance with heroin. But fast forward and started working with ayahuasca, and that was really incredible. It didn't feel like my plant though. Really beneficial. And also there was something else that was calling to me and had no idea. And I received this invitation very, it was really interesting. It was like there was an invitation, but you had to give your name, and this group had to check with spirit if you're ready. So it was this whole mystical thing. And when I was sent this invitation, it was also very cryptic about what this plant was, other than it was from Africa.
Right.
And something in me recognized so fast. I didn't even remember because they didn't say the name. But something inside of me just went like into center, just like lit up and was like, I have to go to the ceremony.
Yeah.
So I went to the ceremony, and it was expensive. It was long. It was inconvenient. I'm now a mother. And my dear family, like, wait, where are you going?
How long was it?
It was from a Friday to a Sunday. And started to understand about this plant and had a really incredible and unique experience. Most people don't have this kind of experience on Iboga. This does not mean I'm special at all in any way. But for me, it was every part of my being recognized this plant.
Wow.
And while people were like laid up, I was receiving so many uploads, and all I could do, I was so busy for the entire time. I would receive information, sit up and like write, and lay back down and go right back into that vision. And so it was this really incredible, like I was working and
what kind of things were you writing down?
it was information about my family and information about why I'd gone and done that and this choice over here and information about my lineage and the wounds and the traumas and why my mother was who she was and why my father was who he was and why I had the childhood that I had. And then this whole clearing out of just like love and forgiveness, and then understanding myself in these journeys that I had had a lot of judgment about, becoming a drug addict. And that it was just this like wave of compassion, and knowing that every single thing that I came here to experience was in divine order. It was absolutely exactly how it had to be. And that it was culminating in this reunion with me with this plant teacher. And so the first time everything came together in my life was when I met Tibetan Buddhism at 17. And the second great coming together was when I met this plant. And I just knew, and parts of me just woke up. And this goes back to that integrity piece. So I was blown away by this plant, and almost like a Westerner grasping, right? And also thinking that there was only one point of access to this plant. This group that was facilitating mystical and interesting, but there was something I recognized, fractured integrity. And yet I wanted to be in connection with this plant. And so I started to apprentice, right? The shaman's apprentice. I started to apprentice this person and support all of these different ceremonies. And I started to see things not look so good. And I started to question this group and the integrity. And just by doing that, there was like this excommunication, right? Yeah. And there's actually some physical abuse going on between the two partners. And I addressed it because that's been my life path, to address the shit that I see.
What did you say?
I said, I'm saying this with total integrity and love. I'm really concerned about both of you. I see that you're in an abusive way with each other.
Yeah.
And this is what I see, and I'm concerned,
Yeah.
So it was scary to see that, be silenced, and then voice myself. And then get the blow of wrath from somebody in the medicine community who was not at all going to let anybody address him. So it was a really intense moment, and also perfect in that I knew in that moment I needed to go directly to Gabon. I knew that I was not here to have a relationship with this plant through a white male's explanation, version, interpretation of a lineage that didn't belong to this white male. And I knew I had to go directly to the source and to the teacher, the real teacher, to receive that teaching and initiation. And it was really scary. It was like one of these things. It was similar to when I first went to go work with this plant, like this knowing, like there was no way I could have not. And I was terrified. Yes. Oh my God, just terrified. And finally it was like, okay, fear is not a good enough reason to not go do this thing, So, and again, expensive, inconvenient, my dear husband, wait, you're going to Africa? You're going alone? And that's what I did.
How long ago was this?
This was 5 years ago.
Wow. So still pretty recent.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been back since then.
You have?
Yeah, twice.
Wow.
So that first, I just knew where I needed to go. And what was interesting is going back to that first experience with this medicine is that I had this vision that I had died. I was a corpse, and I was looking out of the eyes of a corpse. And I was in a village in Africa, and there were all of these children poking me with sticks, and there were vultures around. And there were really specific things about this village. I mean, really specific. And when I got to the village to do my initiation, It was that village.
Wow. How could you tell? Like, what were
There are very specific things in terms of the inside of the village, the internal of the village, with a very special house that has the spirits and special spires that mean specific things. So like points of reference and directionally.
Yeah.
So it was all there.
Yeah.
And it was incredible. And going back, it was the hardest thing I've ever done and the best thing I've ever done.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So what was that like when you got there to have, your vision come to fruition and just be like, well, this must be the place, I guess.
It was just all so in flow for me. Like from the beginning of meeting this plant, it was just complete connection. And so complete trust. And it was really challenging. My French is not good. Nobody spoke English. I was there for probably 10 days total. The majority of that time in a chamber in the place where they do the initiation. I was going through this energetic breakup with this other group. So they actually put a really amazing Bwiti man in the chamber with me for my whole initiation as like buffer protection.
Wow.
And that's pretty unusual. They usually keep men and women different. So I was aware that energetically I was moving through a lot of karma and energy, and having been in the spotlight throughout my life, just things people have put upon me.
Yes.
So it was massive.
Grief, anger, rage.
Oh my God, you name it.
Yeah.
I've never cried that hard in my life. I mean, just cried through the whole thing. And there was so much loneliness also that I addressed, just like deep sorrow that I needed to purge and that I came into in this life. We're these magnificent beings, and bless my family and bless my parents. They did their best with what they had, and they had so little. They were so under-resourced and already from a lineage of trauma. And so, coming into this world and being like the big being that I am, like I don't play small. And to be so confrontational as I was, even at a young age, I could not get my needs met. And none of it lined up, because here I was in this Western family where I knew about the magic and the spirituality, and that's what I migrated to. And that's why I say, like, the first time my life made sense was when I finally, at 17, was introduced to Tibetan Buddhism. And up until then, it was just this really lonely, painful road of like, why am I here doing this? Yeah.
And what did you find when you started getting into Tibetan Buddhism? Like, why did that particularly speak to your soul at that time?
I'm definitely an empath. And when I was little, I was like, I couldn't see anything but all the suffering of this realm. I mean, the suffering of animals and the suffering of humans, and all of the suffering made no sense to me. It was just like a horror show. Yeah. I remember being on the freeway, and there was a kitten that had been crushed. Half of its body was crushed. It was probably 7. And it was trying to get away, and I begged my mother to turn around. Like, you have to help this being. And so for me, it wasn't until Tibetan Buddhism came in and I had the context of suffering and karma and the flow and samsara and nirvana and view and perspective, and teachings that I recognized to put this worldly experience into context for me. And until that moment, it was just like this horrible suffering show that I couldn't comprehend. Yeah. The injustice of it.
Yeah. This is so important. And I feel that there are probably people listening to this who are in, we're all suffering. There's every single person has their own version of what suffering looks like.
Yeah.
And we compound it sometimes by bypassing our own suffering, like we don't deserve it, or we can't feel the emotions fully through. I'm thinking back in your story earlier on when it kind of was the suffering show. And, can you think of a time maybe when that lens was the most narrow, before the insights, before you were able to widen your perspective and really understand the full picture?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me it was just how it was in my childhood. There was such a want to speak out and be heard and have conversation around like death and dying. Like I really wanted to have those conversations when I was little, because that's what I saw. And that's like, and my parents had no ability to engage with me in the ways that I needed. And this is, I'm dear friends with my family now. I have an incredible relationship with both of my parents, but we were extremely neglected children. That was just my upbringing. We were totally neglected. And, you look at that time. So I was born in 1968, but the 1970s, it's like, as long as everything looked okay from the outside, and you were going to the right school and driving the right car and all of that facade. So I think for me, the more harrowing part of that was that I wasn't seen, and that it was terrifying to me. I guess it was really confusing, like to move through life where you don't have that loving and nurturing. My mother, from a very early age, before I entered modeling, I was already having disordered eating. And so I realized, I guess the narrowest point is that I was a little girl that did not have a model that was safe. And my mother was uncomfortable being a woman. And so for me, there was something instilled, like I never got the initiation of powerful feminine, divine feminine.
Right.
There was shame, and there was darkness, and there were secrets. And for me, as I moved through adolescence and pre-puberty, the thought of becoming a woman was terrifying. It was terrifying. It was hideous. It was ugly. It was fractured. It looked like my mom because she was the wounded feminine.
Right.
And so I think it was that like feeling completely out of control moving into puberty and feeling the terror of that, and that there was nobody there holding my hand in an empowered way. And so really I developed anorexia from like puberty on. And that was my way of controlling my physicality so that I didn't develop. It was the one thing in this crazy world that I had control over, what I put in my body, and that I actually could manipulate, not developing. So I think that was the narrow before I started getting some nuggets of wisdom. And then, of course, to go from that to being a runaway, a trafficked kid, and then into a situation where I was sexually assaulted for several months.
Are you willing to talk about, I guess, the beginning of that? Like, how on earth did you go from a young, normal girl to suddenly you're modeling? I don't know how old you were when that all started, and how were you discovered?
Yeah, so because of my family situation, I ran away several times. I was in a halfway house. And then because... So
you ran away. Sorry to interrupt. You ran away. Did they know where you were?
They did. And then it finally became so routine that they stopped looking for me.
Okay. And how old were you at this time?
It kind of started around 13. And then 14, my first boyfriend committed suicide. He shot himself in the head. And I was sent away to a boarding school. And I went through 1 year of that, freshman, and then I bailed. So I was 15, 16 when I was like fully out. They weren't looking for me. And
I mean, that alone is an incredible amount of early trauma.
oh my God.
With nobody holding your hand.
Oh my God.
I'm emotional just hearing it.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's a lot.
Yeah.
It's a lot. There was a lot that I was supposed to experience, and definitely in my early life. I mean, my life is total miracle. It really is.
Thank you for being here and making it through all that.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for seeing me.
We need your leadership.
Thank you. So I was a dropout, completely disconnected from family, and really because of my dyslexia, like didn't have confident math skills. So taking a regular job was really terrifying. And the only thing I could think of and that I'd heard about was modeling. So I looked up an agent in San Francisco, Gary Loftus. He died of AIDS, but he was a really lovely one. And he footed the bill to take some pictures of me. I totally lied about my age. And he faxed them to John Casablancas, who was the owner of Elite. So Elite New York, which was then also going global. Elite was buying all these other agencies. So John Casablancas paid for me to go from San Francisco to New York, where I stayed in a model's apartment. And I look back at this as like really perfect grooming, like classic textbook grooming, was that I had no money. I was staying in a model's apartment. So they were footing the bill. So essentially I owed them everything, had to do what was asked. And there were several months of just endless rejection, and people talking about my body and how I looked in front of me as if I wasn't there.
You're
She's
16?
fat. She's too this. She's too this. She's too that.
Yeah.
She's too European to make it in America. It was the time where it was like the voluptuous blondes and Christy Brinkley and all of those. And so, actually, one of the agents at the New Faces division, a woman, took a liking to me and took me into her apartment, which was connected to the model's apartment. And that was actually like a good thing. If Trudy liked you and you got into her apartment, like you might have a chance of making it. So there's all this like weird
hierarchical.
And her boyfriend made a move to hit up on me. And I thought the right thing to do was to tell her. And when I told her, she flipped out, totally flipped out. Like,
what did he do?
He, I think, put his hand up my shirt and his tongue down my throat, and
Yeah, I do know, unfortunately.
Totally.
Yeah.
And I was a kid. I was 16.
Right.
You know, like in this complicated world, already totally traumatized and wounded. Like, so went to the adult to tell her because I wanted help.
Right.
And I wanted her to know that she was with this bad guy.
Right.
And it totally backfired, and she sent me to Paris. And sent me not only just like to Paris, but sent me to Paris to stay with this man. The agent, the boss. You're going to go stay with the boss. And made it sound like that was a good thing.
Right.
Like, that's a good thing.
I mean, when you first told her, what was her face? What was her reaction, her emotion?
All I can remember is that, well, for me, it was that, of course, more shame. Like, oh my God, I fucked up.
Right. This is my fault.
Totally that cycle that we're all sort of indoctrinated into, groomed into, of like, you know, there's this abuse and this is your fault.
Yeah.
So, and this was, I think, really hard because it was also coming from a woman.
Yeah.
A woman who I was trusting.
Yeah.
And then also the sense of like, I totally fucked up. Yeah. Like I totally blew this.
Yeah.
And I blew it because I told her. So like further grooming into silence.
And suppressing your speech and like your spirit of like how you came out kicking, like ready to disrupt things.
Totally.
So that was kind of just like, I guess, just almost cauterizing that
Yeah.
part of you slowly and painfully over these, repeated traumas.
Yeah.
I really want to talk about this one piece a little bit more because I don't hear it talked about enough. And it was really lighting something up in my own experience of when you were talking about being talked about like you were a piece of cattle or something like you weren't even there in the room. And I think this whole concept of people that we put on pedestals who are, physically beautiful, it's like this is obviously deeply connected to the suffering, objectification, sexualization of women, of children. And I want to talk about it because I've had some experiences too. It's like when I first moved to New York, I was getting asked to do things too, like small things here and there, be in a rap video, whatever. And you're like, okay, this is cool. And you're standing there and they're literally talking about you and comparing you to the other women. Well, she's got a better ass, so put her there. Okay, like she's got breasts, so like let's have her sitting and like leaning forward. And it's like it does something to you. Mm-hmm. It erodes you, but it also becomes so normalized. Mm-hmm. Like I don't know how to explain it, almost like Stockholm syndrome. Mm-hmm. And when you're around it so much, you just become desensitized. Yeah. So I want to talk about the fact that being beautiful isn't easy either, and I don't mean that in a like, oh, mm-hmm. woe is me. I think that this is a story that needs to be told. Mm-hmm. It's incredibly difficult. I'm getting emotional now. Mm-hmm.
What's coming up for you?
It's incredibly difficult to walk around and have people fling their desires onto you as a young person.
Yeah.
And not necessarily have the tools to understand that.
Yeah.
So I would love if you could share about this topic that is very important to me as well.
I think that that's actually the first violation that I recall. And I think that humans need to know that it lands like a violation. When somebody crosses that sacred boundary, when you are a young person and somebody looks at you in a way that's inappropriate, looks at your body in a way that's desiring.
Yes.
It is a violation in a boundary, and that childhood, there needs to be a sanctity around childhood. And sadly, there's a lot of perversion in this world. And it needs to be called out. And part of the perversion and part of the problem of where we are right now is it's not been addressed. And little girls and little boys have been groomed and told, and we've been prepared from so young to go hug your uncle, to say bye-bye, whatever it is, but not to be like, you can rest assured my daughters have been raised in a totally different way. And I'm constantly like, did you call that out? Did you let that boy know how uncomfortable that made you feel and how inappropriate that is? Mm-hmm. But for the most part, we've really lacked that. And the way to change it moving forward is to talk about it, is to have these conversations, is to raise our young people in a way where they get to name it. Mm. They don't have to normalize it. They get to name it. If it feels yucky, it's yucky. Mm. If it makes you uncomfortable, it's inappropriate. Mm-hmm. And you get to have the agency restored to you to be able to name it and not normalize it. Mm. And it happens far too often. And part of the problem, of course, entertainment and, media modeling industry is it's also perpetuating you, right? It's like unregulated and perpetuating rape culture, porn culture, sexual objectification, and sexualization of children. And we put this in all of like our ad campaigns and Calvin Klein and this, and you've got like pedophilia that we've completely desensitized ourselves to.
Right.
It's been so normalized in all of our communities. Yeah. And we are in this great wake up right now. And it is my obligation, it's my responsibility as a human being in this time to totally speak out about all this stuff. And I've been wildly unpopular at times for doing so, and I don't give a shit. I mean, it's just how it is.
Right.
Yeah.
Thank you. For the mothers and fathers who are listening to this and hearing your words and thinking about their own daughters or sons, thinking about what to say to them in the current landscape of this world, how can they help undo what's been done for thousands of years? How can every parent listening do their little piece? What can they say? What kind of conversations can they have with their children?
Yeah, it's such an important question. And there is, and let's just say this is uncomfortable. The last thing as a mom I wanted to do was to have to educate my children that they're child molesters, kids are taken and trafficked, that there's slavery today in a larger number than ever before. But the only way to protect our kids is to educate them and is to have these conversations. And so let's just call it like, yes, it's really uncomfortable. We all want to stay in this bubble. If you want to keep your kids in a bubble, do the Waldorf school. That's what I've done, but also concurrently educating them and empowering them. And then I think that there's a lot of ways that we as parents have also been conditioned and have probably done some wrongs in terms of conversations that we might not have had or things we've tried to make it okay because it's a family dynamic. But to be able to have heart-to-heart, connected, honest conversations, own it when we mess up because of our conditioning, like name it, own it. And then one thing that's really, I think, very important and apropos is Dr. Gail Dines. She is incredible and has several different programs. I think it's called Changing Attitudes, but I may be wrong, but we'll
look it up.
Yeah, we'll look it up. Dr. Gail Dines. She does several different online trainings for parents, how parents can discuss this, because one of the biggest problems today is pornography, and pornography that is targeting our children. And it is contributing to rape culture. It's contributing to violence against women. It's contributing to human trafficking. It's real. It's happening. And if you think your kids haven't found it, think again. But Dr. Gail Dines does an incredible online training for parents, like how to protect your kids from what is being targeted to them, how to talk with your children, how to talk with your school. So I highly recommend going down that route. I think she's the best, and she's badass, and she's great.
Thank you for that recommendation. Your daughters, again, are, did you say 12 and 14?
We might as well say 13 and 14, because she's going to be 13 in a couple days.
13 and 14. Yeah. And how do you personally talk to your daughters about the concept of like sex and intimacy, and like when, it's different for every parent, and I want to say that and underscore that, but I think this is connected to all of this. It's something that we need to break down the shame around, even, because maybe our parents didn't have that conversation with us. I was blessed that my parents did, and they told me the difference between sex and lovemaking very, very young. I mean, that was a conversation that changed my life, and this idea that every person you share physical intimacy with, any man, they let me know, any man that you let penetrate your sacred womb space, you will be connected to forever.
Yeah.
Wow. I mean, what better, and it wasn't shame-based. It wasn't fear-based. Yeah. It was just here's the energetic implications of the choices you're going to make, and empower yourself,
Yeah.
you know?
At what age did they have that conversation
Oh,
with you?
young, I think. I mean, because it started with watching movies, you know, and there would be a sex scene, and it would be like, okay, pause the sex scene, have a conversation before we, you know, replay what we're about to see, or depending on the age, maybe it wasn't the right time for us to see the sex scene. But if we were going to, you know, it's part of the movie, it's part of the narrative. Let's not pretend like it's not here.
Yeah.
And we'll just talk about it honestly. So I was lucky in that way, but I'm curious, you know, with all of your experience and everything you had to go through and just be an absolute warrior to make it alive through, how do you bring a love-based message, but still bring in that discernment piece to your beautiful young daughters?
Well, first, your parents sound amazing. And
I was a Waldorf kid too.
Yes.
I became a Waldorf teacher later in life. I don't know if you knew that.
I did not know that. Yeah. Yes. And now my 8th grader graduating is like, Mom, I don't want to be a Waldorf anymore. She's like, I just want public high school. I'm like, okay.
I get it. I reached that point
totally.
too. Yeah.
So how do I do it? I model this energetic with my husband. I am married to my other half, my best friend. Like I leave the house and I call him.
Yeah. I love that.
We play together. We make love together. We've made babies together. We've created spaces together. We've been in ceremony together. It's just been, and to have magnetized that after a really loveless life, right? Yeah. And, you know, I say that everything I've been through has really informed me how I want to be in this world. And having been in such disconnect for so long, my greatest spiritual path and endeavor is to be in connection with source, connection with the tulips outside, connection with you here, connection with my husband, with my children. So we've walked this path. I've not hidden my life from them. I have been age appropriate in conversation about everything I've been through, my abusive marriage, you know, the suicide that happened, the rape that happened. All of these experiences are part of our conversation. They know me. There is not a part of me that hides today. They know me completely. And so we've had a lot of conversation around sex and sexuality, and they know the marriage that I was in and the path that I journeyed to be in this. You know, I was going to take my robes as a Tibetan Buddhist nun. I was celibate for 5 years after.
Wow.
After I got divorced, I met my amazing teacher, Adzom Rinpoche, who is in Tibet, and was going to take my robes. I started these preliminary practices called Nundro that took me several years.
Okay.
It's like 100,000 prostrations, 100,000 mandala offerings, 100,000 Vajrasattva. And in this, I took a vow of celibacy, and I said to my teacher, I think I want to take my robes as a nun. And he said, wait and finish your Nundro. And the day I finished my Nundro, I met Matthew.
No.
Yes.
No.
5 years later.
Way. How did you meet him?
At Whole Foods in Mill Valley.
It happens like that. So what's the story? You're just like cruising through the aisles.
I had to take this journey of celibacy because it was ultimately only my relationship with self I needed to heal. Everything else was like, you can't heal your relationship with your mother until you've healed your relationship with self. Like I had to come home.
Yeah.
And from such a young age, I was, had dissociated and was in constant separation and PTSD and had not had an orgasm by someone else's hand ever in my life. Had faked it. Wow. Like I was like queen of, and
how old were you?
When what?
When you had this first orgasm.
With my husband, with Matthew.
Yeah, so it was...
So 35?
That needs to be said.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And
That's
how
incredible.
many women are in such disconnect from their sexuality that they can't let that happen. And that once you start to create a performance, it's very hard to not have that performance. And especially me with my career, it was so tied up in a persona and my sexuality. And everyone thinking I was
pleasing other people.
Totally. Mm-hmm. So this path of celibacy and then meeting Matthew and I didn't want to be in a relationship. Like in that 5 years, I got to the place where I was my best friend, my best date, all of it. I completely could take care of myself. I wasn't in need anymore.
Right.
And wasn't in wounding, was just like totally stoked.
Yeah.
Really stoked. And so when I met him, I recognized him. Like, I'm like, oh. And it wasn't like desire. It was like, hi.
Good to see you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
And also there was all this stuff of like feeling like I needed to protect myself.
Right.
And to make sure he knew I wasn't like at all. Cause I was really like living I was up at 4 every morning practicing, yoga practice, like all of it. I was in my own solo retreat for several years.
Yeah.
And so when he asked me for my number, it was the first time in my life I ever was boundaried in a good way.
Yeah.
And I just said, I actually don't give out my number.
Yeah.
I said, but I'll take yours.
Yeah.
Right.
Good.
I'm like, oh my God, that was
good
really
job,
cool.
Carrie. Like patting yourself on the back.
Like, cool. Okay, the 5 years did you good. Like, right? And so it was crazy because I got in my car and I called him immediately.
Yes.
And then I freaked out. And then
wait, so was he still in the store?
He was on his way. He was surfing. He was on his way to go surf.
Okay.
So he was already over the hill with no reception.
Okay.
And so I called, and then he called me back, and I was like, I can't do this. And I didn't call him for 2 weeks. And then
did you answer or you just let it go through?
I just let it go.
Okay.
Totally did that. Like, what am I even doing? And then after 2 weeks, we agreed to hike. And our whole beginning courtship was like on the mountain hiking, getting to know each other, building friendship. But it was a really intense path to walk through sexually.
Yeah.
Because I didn't know how to just be me, and that being me and being vulnerable and also having no place to go, like there's nowhere to go, just be. And then also bringing in a male who also has been conditioned that the way that the relationships mean that they're doing well is if we're having sex. And guess what? I couldn't do it fast like that. It was like, so I was really clear with him, like, this is going to be a new walk that neither of us have taken. And this is the only way I can do it.
Yeah.
Is to like go slow, and I don't want to have sex right. Like, so, it was also going back through time and honoring a voice in me that never got to say, I don't want to do this. No, that doesn't feel good. And so walking through this journey with him and having to honor myself so authentically in every moment, even if it didn't make sense. Like right now, I feel frightened and I don't want you to put your hand on my thigh.
Yeah.
Like I never got to say that in my life before.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us have just had to like be quiet, have sex, like whatever it is.
Yep.
Yeah. So it was really liberating. Ultimately, I proposed to him on a beach in Hawaii.
You proposed to him?
Uh-huh.
I love that. After how long?
I think we were 6 months in, and we had taken ecstasy.
Yes.
The great heart opener.
I just did an MDMA journey with my partner and talked about it on this show. So it's so powerful.
It was the greatest heart opener. And it was just like, I think I need to marry you. Like, would you?
How would you feel about that?
Totally.
Yeah.
And from there, it was like we put in all of the work and therapy in those first 6 months, just walking, talking, learning how to be together. And that was my first orgasm with another, which was just incredible, earth-shattering, so vulnerable and intense, you
yeah.
know, and then getting married. And then we were married in December. And by February, I was pregnant, despite the fact I hadn't had a period in 5 years. And was told by 2 specialists that we couldn't get pregnant. So there's
this is amazing.
Totally.
Because I also didn't menstruate for like 2.5 years in my mid-20s. And I had that fear, like I'm never going to be able to have kids. And now I know what I know after working with plant medicine, and the body keeps a score, and recognizing that everything physical has an emotional component. Totally. Duh. But, you know, before you wake up to that, it's kind of like they seem disconnected, just as we are at that point in our journeys, very disconnected from our bodies and ourselves. But it took deep emotional healing after repeated sort of like, I'll call them minor sexual violations, but it's really like, what does that even mean?
Totally.
I just had a friend of mine who specializes in trauma and somatics on the show. And one thing that he said that was really powerful was like, it's not necessarily the size of the trauma that you know determines how traumatizing the event is. It's like, did you have the support?
Yeah.
So after so many little like micro traumas that I had in this particular area, I believe that there's just so much anger and resentment and pain and grief that just settled in my womb space. And it was like, nuh-uh, like I'm not gonna cycle. I don't even want to be a woman. Yeah. I wanted to escape my body, and all the doctors couldn't figure out what you know, it must be because you're a thin, active person that you're not having a menstrual cycle. And at that point I was eating healthier than most, you know, my parents were incredibly holistic. Yeah. So there wasn't, you know, like it didn't make sense why I wasn't. And so I love you sharing this part of your story because I think it's obviously more common than people think for the body to respond in these wild and wonderful ways.
Yeah.
So I'd like to hear more about that, but I know from my own journey, again, even just meeting my new partner, we were joking about it yesterday, and I was standing in the mirror and I was like, I think my breasts grew, you know, like I'm like, and he's like, oh babe, your breasts definitely grew, you know, in the time that we've been together. It's been about 4 months now. And what I realized is, you know, before we met, I was kind of unearthing another layer of deep trauma, and my nervous system was in fight or flight again, and trying to understand it all on my own. And he's a doctor of clinical psych, and just by nature of the kind of conversations we have in Pillow Talk, my nervous system is starting to settle and heal in these gentle, beautiful ways, and my body is responding in a very real way. So I'm curious if you think that's similar to what happened to you as you started to gently have the support to work through some of these traumas, that your body literally started to flower back open.
Totally. Absolutely. Well said. And yes, yeah, absolutely. And it was through the deep work that I'd done, but also you don't know you haven't done until you're in that other situation that presents itself. So hadn't realized I could have taken my robes and gone into a 3-year retreat, and it would have been easy. But what my path I was called to do, the invitation was to actually go into the most triggering place, which was in an intimate relationship with another. So mirroring and triggering. And I got to see all the things that actually, had I gone and taken my robes, I would never have been given the opportunity to continue to resolve the conflicts that still were there, that I would never have noticed unless I was with somebody one-on-one. And to be paired up with somebody so gentle, so kind, you know, that I was able to magnetize that at that point. And then this like more subtle energetic healing process was able to take place that then absolutely manifested in the healing of the physical body. Yeah. Did you find yourself, because I totally agree with you, I think going to get your robes would have been kind of on one level like an avoidance of the things that were the most scary to you, which was being in intimate connection. Absolutely. Because life had taught you that wasn't a safe route. Yeah. So
you meet this wonderful man, you're going on these walks, you're like, this is great. But then did you find it was like waves and layers of just like spontaneous things coming up for you to be processed with him? I know in my own journey, it's been like, some days I'm just crying, or we make love and then I'm just crying, or I'm just like, I'm like, where did this come from? And trying not to attach too much to understanding it, just allowing it to pass through. But I'm curious if you had that in your experience with him, just like as you created more safety, just things.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Did you want to run away at any point?
Oh yeah. There were moments that I wanted to maintain a level of control, like this has to be my way completely. And there was a little bit about honoring that, but also when does this become like a control thing? Because you're afraid of letting go.
Yeah.
You're afraid of being vulnerable, right? Which is the whole thing around the inability to have an orgasm with another, right? Just like I need to maintain control because if I get vulnerable, I'm going to get hurt. And I've already seen that. So, so there was sort of just like peeling back the layers. It was mostly in and around the sexual piece, though. There was so much trauma and so much like automatic dissociation. Like the second we were intimate, I was gone. Like I wasn't able to feel my body.
Right. Just numb.
So we really worked with this amazing therapist who gave us homework. Like how to slow it down and how to actually not bypass or speed through the uncomfortable pieces, but how to like hang out in them.
Ooh. So can you give me like an example of what that looked like?
So after sharing, it was similar to the Africa thing. Like I so wanted to be with this person, but I didn't know how to get from where I was to being free with this person in this beautiful, intimate relationship. Like I had no idea. I'd never had.
Yeah.
So we needed somebody to help us with this roadmap. And so, Stephen, the therapist, basically said, okay, tonight and for the next 7 nights, I want you with your clothes on just to lay down and hold each other. Then that's it. Nothing else is going to happen. So don't be freaking out. Something's going to happen. Don't dissociate. So it was step by step.
Wow.
Giving us pieces and tools to practice how to be together without dissociating and how to build on, this actually is safe. This is okay. I can be here in this. And if it gets uncomfortable, say that because it's not going to go to this other thing where you dissociate. So it was really building step by step on, slowly it was, okay, without your shirts on, lay in that. And you're not allowed to go further because I really needed to. And Matthew too, like how often people just bypass this like beautiful buildup of intimacy.
Yes.
Right? That is the way it's supposed to be, slowing things down. And for the male, especially like the stories that Matthew also held of like, I'm with a supermodel, and if she's not having sex with me, then she doesn't like me. And then my male ego has to come in because something's wrong like this.
Right.
We both had to unwind so much. And it was an incredible journey. So back to sharing with my kids, though, they know this journey. They know the path that I've walked and the path Matthew's walked with me. And so we have a very healthy household in talking about sex and also no expectations, whether you like boys, girls, whatever it is, like we're all of us here are on paths of self-discovery. And to honor that. And as long as my daughters are treated like a goddess or God, and they treat others with respect and that things are safe and consensual, any kind of exploration is awesome.
Beautiful.
Right?
Thank you. You have such an articulate way. You have such a power and a beautiful force behind you. You have taken these immense experiences and now are alchemizing them into some incredibly powerful things. I want to ask you right now, what in your life is exciting you the most that you're working on?
There's so many things.
Let's have them all.
Yeah. So I would say both of these separate documentaries. One is with Wonderhood, The Guardian, which is an incredible journalistic paper out of the UK, and then Sky Television, which is global. And it is really about the modeling industry, what I endured. It's a 3-part docuseries. I'll be in all of those because my story spans the decades that all of the different pieces have happened within this industry that to this day is an unregulated industry. It is used as a means for human trafficking. It really informs humanity of false cultural norms. So I'm really happy to be sort of the matriarch at this point and be in collaboration with that documentary. Concurrently, there's another documentary about Iboga that Lucy Walker is doing. We've been talking for the past couple years, and I've just filmed my first part, and we're going to be in Costa Rica filming some medicine nights there. And so I was saying to you earlier, it's kind of my coming out party because my life has been in lots of different separate compartments, and people have not, I don't think I've ever been able to be sort of authentically everything that I am until more recently. I'm 52, and today I'm really unapologetic in taking up space, being loud, and being exactly who I am authentically. And I don't think I was able to do that for a long time. And I know now I need to write my second book.
Yeah.
Because this other wave of my healing and my journey and really what I'm stepping into and doing now is so important. And yeah.
So what do you think that second book feels like it's calling to be about?
It's calling to be about my healing journey, my work with plant medicine, my just profound connection to West Africa, to Gabon, to the Witi lineage. I feel really concerned in this psychedelic renaissance about our impact on our indigenous families. And I think that is not spoken about nearly enough. We've seen everything from clear cutting to murder to stealing to so many pieces, both in South America, Brazil, and now for sure in Gabon, as these things become more popular and people do glamorize and want to experiment. And on one hand, that's beautiful. And on the other hand, we don't really have the pieces in place to safeguard these communities. And I think that needs to be a conversation with everyone in the plant community. What is our code of ethics and our code of conduct? How do we navigate this landscape and keep both of our indigenous families safe, as well as the people that are going to be experimenting with these sacraments? We know that people are saying they're facilitators and buying medicine off the internet, and it's going to be problematic unless we really give this some serious thought.
Right. So what can the average person do who feels passionate about also helping in this cause and preserving and being intentional? Because that's a big topic. And if we're not informed, it feels like I could see how one could feel a little helpless. So what would you recommend if someone listening to this really wants to make sure they're at the bare minimum doing their part to not contribute to that?
Yeah, I think, first and foremost, if you're considering taking plant medicine, you need to make sure that you've evaluated yourself psychologically. Do you have a history of psychotic breaks? Does your family have a history of mental illness? Have you had points in your life of, depression or bipolar disorder? And then, so are you mentally prepared? Are you physically prepared? Who is the facilitator? Who have they studied with? What gives them the right to be serving medicine? Where does their medicine come from? There's someone we work with within the ayahuasca community, but he has his own, his land in Peru, and he sustainably plants and harvests and cooks his own medicine. And he has church status, so he transports his own medicine, and he knows exactly, it's full circle. He knows exactly. Yeah. So everyone on the floor, knows exactly. And these are really important questions to ask. And I think going from this whole conversation of many of us growing up in a culture where we're not supposed to ask anything, this is actually a really important time for all of us to be asking questions.
Yes.
What are we putting in our body? What is somebody pushing us to put in our body? We are sacred, divine beings, and we deserve to know as much as we can about the weather and climate and what we're packing for that journey that we're going on.
I like what you just said. We just talked about this on my last episode too, which is this idea of empowering ourselves to ask these questions. And the image that, to use your word, was uploaded to me just now, which I like that you say upload instead of download. That was uploaded to me was a child asking questions. You know how children, when they're young, they're just like, what's that? What's that? But why can't we do this? Why can't we, And if you've ever been a child who's asked a lot of questions and been shut down, that shame that you feel in your body and how it feels wrong, right? Yeah. Like there's something that feels yucky inside of us when someone tells us we can't ask a question. So that, for me, is the compass. Yeah, totally. When something feels yucky, we trust that. When somebody tells us we are not allowed to ask questions, who made that rule? Why are questions not okay? I'm trying to learn about this world that I live in. And one way that I do that is by asking all the questions I want.
Yeah. And we're really living in a very bizarre time where people aren't asking questions about really important things. And not only, might we have been conditioned to not ask those questions, but we're also growing up and now in governments and communities and cultures that are shutting questions down. Right. And so it's even more important now to take notice of that and keep asking questions.
Absolutely. I want to ask you a random side question, which is, what's your favorite thing about your husband?
There's so many things. He's just the sweetest guy. He's just kind. He has integrity, and he's really funny, and he's a really good dancer. He used to be a professional dancer in Boston. Yeah, totally.
No way. What does he do now?
He's an environmental scientist. He's a chemical engineer. He just took, his fourth CEO president position of a really incredible environmental company in Canada called Matrix. The Matrix.
Nice.
I'm like, oh, okay.
So a chemical engineer who can really cut a rug. That's your man.
I know. Totally.
I love it.
Right?
I love it. Yeah. So special. He sounds like a wonderful father as well.
Yeah, he is.
Beautiful. So as we kind of come to a close here, just inviting you to just tune in with your own heart. And you have this space to share anything, whether it's a potent piece of an upload from any of your plant medicine, whether it's a line of Tibetan Buddhist wisdom that changed the trajectory of your life, or another thing that's on your heart that's coming to the surface to be shared right now with this audience. I would love to open the floor up to you.
It's been fascinating this past year and a half. Actually, I know what it is. It actually has to do with the kindness of strangers. that there have been moments throughout my journey that I really didn't know how I could ever get from where I was in the suffering that I was in to that other place that I so hoped my life would be. And it has truly been through the kindness of strangers, these acts of random kindness. I can think of a time when I was in a rehab in LA and in a horrible place, and Allie McGraw came just to say hi and that she believed in me. Wow. And a time in Nepal when I was so sick, and a Nepalese woman coming and just giving me tea.
Yeah.
And in Africa, when I was in my initiation and somebody putting a cool washcloth on my forehead. And I think one of the most important pieces for all of us about our lives is to make sure that we are finding time and places to offer an act of kindness. That truly has gotten me to where I am today, in this amazing place with this amazing husband, with these amazing children, with you here, like the divinity of it all, and that we have to realize our impact on people.
Carre, thank you so much for your warrior spirit, for your voice, for your courage, for your work, and for sharing it today with all of us. It's not lost on me what an honor this is to have you. I would like to ask you where people can find you if they're interested in more of your advocacy work, your activism, the films that are coming out, and they want to connect with you.
Well, it's so funny because I don't really have a website. Usually Instagram is a really good place.
Your handle is?
I am Carre Otis. Okay. Yeah, and email through that. Also, the work I do with the Model Alliance, which is incredible. I am on the leadership council there. And so if you're in the industry and want support, we have an incredible support line and tons of resources. And if you are a survivor of sexual assault or sexual harassment or discrimination within the industry, you can reach us at the Model Alliance support line. And we run incredible programs through there as well.
And you have the Bear Mama Project. Do you want to plug that for a second?
Yeah, so the Bear Mama Project, we're branching out, but it's one of the things that my business partner and I, Dr. Sarah Spinner, and I noticed that in parenting, oftentimes moms are picking up the bottle way more than they want to be. And we both did our coach training through Annie Grace, This Naked Mind, which is an incredible resource and book. And it's not necessarily about stopping drinking, but it's about being a lot more mindful of the choices we make. And so when COVID hit, we saw that a lot of the mom memes that were going around were like, what's in the sippy cup, mommy wine time, and that was the go-to for a lot of the stress and the all of a sudden situation we were all thrown into with our children. So out of it was birthed the Bear Mama Project. You can check us out on the bearmamaproject.com. And we go through different courses. There's the Bear Mama Den, which has different meditations and support for mamas or any caregiver or anyone who identifies as a caregiver. And we actually are going to be offering courses in mindfulness around body image issues, eating disorders, all of these pieces. So we're growing that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carre. Yeah. Truly.